Welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that's ignited debates and raised eyebrows, not just in South Africa, but across the globe. Donald Trump's unexpected offer of refugee status to white South Africans. The twist? Many white South Africans have actually turned this proposal down. Yes, you heard that right. So, what's behind this puzzling turn of events? Are the people in South Africa truly under siege, as Trump suggests? Or is there a larger narrative that's being overlooked? Together, we'll unravel this complex tale, dissect the realities in South Africa, and explore what this means for the broader geopolitical landscape. Grab your popcorn, it's going to be an intriguing ride. In a surprising twist of political drama, Donald Trump offered refugee status to white South Africans, claiming that these citizens face dire persecution from their government due to recent land reform policies. But the question arises, why would anyone want to leave a country they call home? Many South Africans, particularly those within the white community, have expressed a vastly different sentiment. An elderly resident from Bothasig articulated it best when he said, "There haven't been any really bad people taking over our land. The people are carrying on like normal." This isn't just a story of politics, it's a narrative deeply rooted in history, cultural identity, and a quest for justice. When you take a closer look, you begin to see a timeline rich with complexities. So, what does this offer really signify? While the world wrestles with severe humanitarian crises like those in war-torn regions or areas struggling with famine and disease, Trump seems focused on perpetuating a narrative of white victimization in South Africa. But alas, the real story is quite the opposite. To truly grasp why Trump is fixated on South Africa, we must dig into the Expropriation Act of 2025. This landmark policy aims to address the centuries-old injustices of land dispossession rooted in colonialism and the apartheid regime. For over 100 years, Indigenous South Africans were systematically stripped of their ancestral lands, a process that reached its brutal peak during apartheid. As a result, white settlers, who comprised a minority of the population, ended up controlling the vast majority of agricultural areas. By 1994, when apartheid officially ended, these deep-seated inequalities remained entrenched in the fabric of South African society. The newly democratic government initiated land reform efforts through a willing buyer, willing seller model, which encouraged white landowners to voluntarily sell their land back to the state for redistribution. However, as you might guess, this approach proved sluggish and ineffective. Fast forward 3 decades post-apartheid, and shockingly, white South Africans, amounting to less than 10% of the population, still owned around 72% of private agricultural land. This glaring inequity sparked the introduction of the Expropriation Act of 2025, which allows the government to seize land in cases of public interest, permitting equitable compensation in some instances, or even no compensation at all, if the land is deemed to have been historically stolen. And let's clarify something important. The Expropriation Act does not indiscriminately confiscate land from white farmers, despite what Trump and his allies may have claimed. Instead, it provides a structured legal framework meant to expedite land reform while ensuring economic stability for South Africa. However, because this initiative challenges the Western economic model of land ownership and resource dominance, it's been met with fierce resistance from various sectors, including big corporations and political players in America. The international narrative, pushed mainly by Trump and right-wing US media, has seized upon South Africa's land reform as part of a broader ideological battle against racial justice movements worldwide. By distorting the Expropriation Act into a narrative of white victimhood, Trump has weaponized this issue to rally his conservative base, particularly those who view land reform as an extension of the anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion movements gaining traction in the United States. Elon Musk, the billionaire with South African roots, has recently fueled a disinformation narrative claiming that the South African government is targeting white farmers based solely on race. This assertion is misleading. The government has reiterated its commitment to lawful land reform aimed at addressing decades of land theft rather than engaging in racially motivated land grabs. The real concern, however, lies with figures like Donald Trump, whose vocal outrage seems less about human rights and more about safeguarding U.S. corporate interests in South Africa's agricultural and mining sectors. These multinational companies have thrived on the existing model that exploits cheap labor and land access, benefiting without regard for local populations, which remain marginalized. Should South Africa succeed in redistributing land fairly, it poses a significant threat to this entrenched economic model, potentially inspiring other African nations to reclaim their sovereignty. Countries like Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Kenya are already eyeing similar reforms, and if South Africa sets a precedent for just land redistribution, it could disrupt Western control over Africa's precious resources. The stakes are high, not just for South Africa, but for the broader implications on global economic structures. Now, let's take a moment to examine the lengths that Trump has gone to within this context. His actions regarding South Africa are not just empty threats or political posturing. They reveal a deliberate attempt at economic warfare aimed at undermining Pretoria's sovereignty. Over the past few years, Trump's administration has enacted various aggressive strategies to weaken South Africa economically and diplomatically, in a striking move. Former President Trump signed an executive order slashing financial aid to South Africa, targeting vital programs essential for the nation's development. Among the casualties was the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief, PEPFAR, which delivers crucial medication to millions battling HIV and AIDS. This drastic cut jeopardized public health and signaled a chilling shift in U.S. policy. Further complications arose as Trump's administration pressured the World Bank and IMF to restrict funding, fostering economic instability to undermine land reform efforts in South Africa. As if adding fuel to the fire, Trump proposed offering refugee status to white South Africans, falsely claiming they faced persecution due to land reforms. This bizarre suggestion was met with widespread disbelief and ridicule, with many South Africans rejecting the notion of victimhood. Pensioners and young citizens alike voiced their offense, firmly asserting their commitment to staying and fighting for their rights domestically. Even right-wing Afrikaner groups, thought to support Trump's stances, dismissed the idea of fleeing, prioritizing their cultural identity over unfounded claims of crisis. In essence, Trump's tactics backfired spectacularly, sparking both laughter and resolve among the very people he sought to manipulate. The Solidarity Movement, representing over 600,000 Afrikaner families, emphasized their love for South Africa despite governmental disagreements, dismissing claims of a racial purge against white South Africans. This assertion starkly contrasts with former President Trump's failed narrative of an oppressed white minority, a narrative that crumbled when his asylum offer was rebuffed, raising questions about the validity of his claims. If conditions were as catastrophic as he suggested, why weren't white South Africans rushing to escape? The truth is clear. Trump fabricated a crisis that even the supposed victims rejected. His involvement in South Africa's land reform debate was not only diplomatically embarrassing, but also exposed his lack of understanding and relevance. South Africa's land reform is a complex yet essential process for historical rectification, while Trump and his allies continue pushing the victimhood narrative. South Africans firmly respond with a resounding "no thanks." The underlying question remains, what is Trump trying to achieve? His strategy reflects a long-standing U.S. approach of using economic leverage as a form of influence, aiming to enforce compliance with American interests, a tactic seen throughout history in various global conflicts. In Africa, this tactic is seen time and again, often undermining governments seeking independence from Western financial control. Take Zimbabwe, for instance. After former President Robert Mugabe implemented radical land reform policies, redistributing land from white settlers to black Zimbabweans, the U.S. played a direct role in crippling that nation's economy through sanctions that plunged it into hyperinflation and eventual collapse. This historical precedent was later used as a cautionary tale to warn other African nations against implementing similar reforms. Now, let's assess how South Africa has handled this wave of pressure and what it suggests about the future of African nations as a whole. When Trump attempted to cut aid and pressure financial institutions, many erroneously believed this would destabilize South Africa there. However, the reality is that South Africa is far better positioned today to weather such storms than it has been in the past. Through strategic partnerships with countries such as China, Russia, and other BRICS nations, South Africa has taken significant steps toward economic independence. These alliances have reduced its reliance on Western financial systems and created alternative pathways for development and growth. By the time Trump's administration enacted these financial cuts and attempted to isolate the South African economy, Pretoria had already laid down stronger economic foundations that enabled it to withstand Western pressure. BRICS has been actively developing alternative financial mechanisms, including a BRICS Development Bank, which provides funding to member countries without the stringent political conditions often imposed by the IMF or World Bank. Understanding these shifts is crucial. You see, the US strategy, meant to crumble South Africa's economy, is actually pushing the country closer to BRICS and accelerating the very shift away from Western economic control that Washington sought to prevent. Pretoria's ability to maintain stability while facing US pressures serves as a significant blow to American influence globally. As South Africa continues to emerge with its head held high, it stands as proof that nations can chart their paths and reject the oppressive frameworks historically imposed upon them. Trump's economic warfare against South Africa is not merely an offensive against one nation, it is an assault on a larger geopolitical shift. As we witness South Africa thrive despite these attacks, it serves as a beacon of inspiration for other African nations, proving that they too can resist Western economic dominance and create independent economic systems on their terms. In fact, Trump's tactics have backfired spectacularly, making his actions seem less like displays of strength and more like signs of desperation. In conclusion, Trump's attempts to weaponize South Africa's land reform as a political tool have not only failed to destabilize Pretoria's policies, but have also isolated the United States further on the global stage. By opting to cut essential aid, applying pressure on financial institutions, and offering refugee status to white South Africans, he aimed to instigate chaos. Instead, he unwittingly pushed South Africa closer to BRICS nations and accelerated its economic realignment away from Western control. As we reflect on this narrative, it's crucial to recognize that the struggle for land and identity in South Africa is emblematic of a broader movement gaining momentum across the continent, one that strives for justice, equity, and sovereignty. Now more than ever, African nations are stepping up, resisting outside pressures, and reclaiming their stories and futures. Now, we turn it over to you. In your opinion, is Trump's strategy doomed to fail, or do you believe he could salvage something from this debacle? Do you see a future where African nations reclaim their sovereignty and economic power? Join the discussion in the comments below. Your perspective matters immensely. If you found this exploration enlightening and want to stay tuned for more content like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon for notifications on our latest videos. Together, we can nurture a community that celebrates and elevates voices often overlooked. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and until next time, stay curious and engaged.